Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Hallo väki, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Hallo väki, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat.
Well, welcome again to another adventure in writing books, because I have stinted on that activity. We're in Gloucester Bookies. We've typically been recommending books, reading books, talking about books that we enjoyed, and not getting into how to write them. With me is a special guest whose memoirs would be fabulous if he would write it, and he's like yourselves out there. He hasn't written his memoir. Bob Bosselman, PhD. Would it be called biogenetics? Was your specialty, or
molecular genetics?
Molecular genetics. Obviously, pottery class was full, so he became a molecular what?
Molecular biologist.
Molecular biologist. But believe me, even in his youth, he was a prodigy, and he grew up in Gloucester. So there's hope for all of us. I'd like to talk with Bob today as if he were seeking advice from somebody who writes, as I do, and just was saying, well, how would I go about writing a memoir, which is the question of the day. How would I go about writing a memoir? People have done it. People in Gloucester. I want to tell Bob, we've had a guest before named Laura Ventimiglia. And
I know that name.
You know that name. You've seen her. You've met her. A Letter to My Children, which actually is a memoir, and she's called it an Italian-American family's heritage. This is available in town, and it's a book that she dwells deeply into her family background and discovering her roots. That's the theme of the book. And why I say that here, a theme, is that a memoir differs from an autobiography. Typically, in an autobiography, you're writing from cradle to the point where you're writing a whole long life, looking back. That's the autobiography. You're not doing that if you're a memoirist or a memoirista. You are doing, well, what am I interested in? I study nature. So your memoir, for the moment, I would say, knowing Bob, is Nature Studies, a memoir. That would be by Bob Bosselman. And how do you begin that? How do you open? We start with an empty page, a blank sheet of paper, or a computer screen, as you do.
And what a great place Gloucester is.
It would inevitably get into Gloucester,
yeah,
because it's such a natural place of natural beauty.
It's full
I
of
want to ask
nature.
you, does the name Scarlet Tanager mean anything to you?
Yes, the scarlet tanager is a very beautiful bird, songbird, that migrates to this part of the world during the spring and summer.
I believe if I had a show of hands, we can't see the audience, and I said, how many of you have ever seen a scarlet tanager? No hands would go up, but your hand would go up.
I saw one.
Yes.
Once.
But it was spectacular.
And it was spectacular. It was in the spring and the breeding season, and it was a male.
How did you determine that? Did you turn it over, or what did you do?
No, as usual, a lot of times in bird species, the male has the great color.
All right.
And I knew a little bit about birds. And on Cape Ann,
where were you?
From my reading.
Where were you when you?
I saw this bird while I was walking in one of the parks here on Cape Ann, out on the north side on Halibut Point.
You're walking on Halibut Point, not expecting a spectacular anything.
Because from my reading, I know that scarlet tanagers are on Cape Ann. They tend to congregate on the Magnolia side, near Ravenswood Park and that area. And so, the spot where I was at Halibut Point was like on the opposite end of the Cape, so I was surprised. But I was just walking along a trail, and he just came down, flying, landed right in front of me, within 6 feet or so. Looked up and decided, I'm not staying here, and took off again.
Because they're shy.
Yeah, well, they
Shy
don't,
of
they
human
don't,
contact.
they don't like people like me walking down on them. But anyways, he was spectacular.
So
bright red, bright black, black, jet black, bright red wings.
You literally saw him and he saw you.
Yeah, he landed. Oh, geez. Who's this?
Good point to make. I would like to make it now because of what you said about colors of the bird. A memoir, again, differs from an autobiography. If you do the autobiography, they often expect you to do research, check official records, review photographs, videotapes, anything that you have so that you can be accurate in your autobiography. Check with your friends and relatives. But in a memoir, they want you to describe and provide your memory.
Yeah, how you saw it.
How you saw it, how you remember it, how you specifically think. So when I ask you, for example, about the scarlet tanager, and you saw him close up briefly, where this color was it on his head or at his root?
No, the way I recollect it was that it was on the wings.
All right. And again,
but I would have to check it. I might have it backwards because I haven't seen one now for 30 years.
May I say, that's a beautiful thing about memoirs. Nobody's going to say on page 7, Bob Bosselman made a mistake because he said the color was on the wings when it's actually on the head, because that's not what a memoir is about. Memoir is about your memories and the way you remember. So you can look it up as you described. You people can look it up on Scarlet Tanager on the computer, search, and you'll find where the red is, if it's really on the wings or if it's also on the head or what it is. But it's it's a memorable color. That the contrast between dark black, I guess, and deep red, the scarlet red, is a startling juxtaposition. Yes.
There are a number of birds around here that are spectacular. I mean, the male cardinal is spectacular. The Baltimore Oriole is spectacular. The scarlet tanager is spectacular. And if you're lucky, you get to see them.
Okay.
They're
I've forgotten who it is. I think it was a French impressionist artist who said, as a lifetime motto or career tip, study nature. And I'm thinking, in your life, from boyhood on, that's what you have done, is study nature. In fact, you made a living from it, and you educated yourself, especially in it. When I asked you about studying nature and your boyhood in Gloucester, is there an association between Gloucester, if you wrote a memoir, that Gloucester would be like a character in the book?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us more about your boyhood and nature and Gloucester.
Yeah, Gloucester is a spectacular place. It's beautiful. Everybody who's listening knows this. There's beauty all over the place. The shoreline, the central part of Cape Ann and Dogtown Common, and all the little ponds and places that you can explore. And each of these areas can be broken down. And I spent a lot of my youth. I was fascinated by insects, by all kinds of bugs, plants, flowers. So I spent a lot of my time turning over rocks and logs and digging up ant hills and just being fascinated by what was in there. What did I find? I was always the kid that I had my bug of the day in the jar.
How did your mother react to that?
Just keep them outside, that's all. And so it was it was a great place. You know, freshwater, saltwater, tide pools, small swamp. You know, I knew all the places. And of course, you and I are both about 75. So if you go back, you know, 60, 65 years ago, there was still a lot of places in Gloucester that sort of weren't filled in. Like, you know, where the lumber yard and the railroad yard used to be.
Oh, sure.
That used to be, you know, wild.
Right.
You know, between Cleveland Street and Railroad Avenue.
Yeah.
Or Maplewood Avenue.
Sure.
In that area. So now there's McDonald's and all kinds of stuff in there.
And a huge series of parking lots and driveways.
You can drive between the two now. But in the old days, you could walk in there and spend, you know, half a day or whatever exploring, and it was a great habitat for all kinds of things. You know, snake, usually garter snakes, sometimes milk snake. I mean, we never ran into any venomous snakes, but you know, you could find snakes in there. You could find toads and frogs and salamanders and ant hills and you know, turning over a log, you find you know, all of a sudden you're looking at 50,000 ants that are a little upset that you let the sun in. You know, so it was fun and it was enjoyable. It was enjoyable and it was educational. Yeah. Because along the way I picked up little books to read about biology and what to find in the backyard and so forth. And so I was somewhat informed about what I was looking at. And it was exciting to find them after reading about them in the book. Go out and find them.
I think your excitement and your passion would show if you ever chose to write about it. People out there, you look back, think back, list occasions when you've been truly stimulated or impassioned about some event, meeting somebody for the first time, whatever it is. And I've got another one for you that could have been, again, maybe you want to start with the Scarlet Tanager and the sighting. But on the other hand, because I know about you, I'm asking this question. What about starting with a knock on the door and the door opening and it being an encyclopedia salesman that changes your life? Tell about that. That could be the start of the book.
Yeah.
The memoir.
Yeah.
Truly.
When I was I was attending Babson School, so I was somewhere between 7 and 12. I was probably, you know, maybe
a pre-adolescent.
Yeah, maybe in the 3rd grade or something like that. And
which meant you were just starting to read books.
Yeah. Okay. And I happened to be home one day from school, and someone stopped by. You'll have to help me refresh.
Name that person as Alex Destino.
Yes.
Before Destino's, before the sub shop, before all of that fantastic Gloucester stuff, he was selling encyclopedias.
It was Alex Destino.
Yes.
And
big football player and popular guy and charismatic as could be. He could sell ice to the Eskimos, right? Yeah. But he comes into your house.
So he comes in, and he, he met my mother who was home and stuff, and then he said, "Well, you got to come back." So they came back in the evening when my dad was home, and he brought examples of the encyclopedia, showed him and everything, and my dad decided that was a good idea, and so we bought an encyclopedia.
And not only a encyclopedia, it's not like A through Z. You told me it was a three series.
3 sections.
3 sections.
3 series. One was more like a regular encyclopedia. It was alphabetically arranged, and you could look up any topic. And another section was devoted to science. and it was alphabetical also, but you could look up anything related to science, astronomy or botany or telescopes or whatever. And the third was literature, short stories and stuff that were famous.
Let me guess, what you fell in love with and wanted to read and it excited you was the
Science part.
just by nature.
Yeah.
Nobody coaxing you or
Yeah.
you just found it yourself.
So
Yes.
during the course of my
Thank you, Alex Destino,
yes,
wherever you are.
Yeah,
Rest in peace.
during the course of my tenure at Babson School, I managed to stay home a fair amount of time.
This
early
guy's
early morning blues, and I would spend the day going through the encyclopedia.
is beyond the statute of limitations for prosecution by the truant officer. But he stayed home. He skipped school so that he could educate himself with the encyclopedia, studying at home. By the way, I'm going to shift gears for a minute away from Bob, please,
Sure.
excuse me, and tell people about a book that was on the bestseller list for 2 years, 2 consecutive years. It's called Educated by a woman named Tara Westover. And she grew up in a Mormon family out west where survivalists have an idea that you shouldn't do public schools, see anybody, go to shopping centers, vaccinations and all that. Do your own thing on a farm. And that was fine, except she realized in time she wasn't learning what she wanted to know. And so she wrote this book, after all. It's called Educated, and it says subtitle, A Memoir, so you can't go wrong. This is a memoir. And she starts off when she's young and how it is on effectively the farm. And then she eventually, at age 17, with nothing but self-education, at age 17, no certificate, no diploma, no classes, at age 17, she starts college. And goes
young.
and goes through to become a PhD. She educates herself. Now, the struggles on the way are many, and the obstacles she faces. And she doesn't hesitate to share with you her memory of those struggles. So I'm telling you, there was a reason it was on the bestseller list for 2 years. And you can do it too. How you educate yourself. In fact, at least for a chapter, as you heard from Bob, in Gloucester, Massachusetts, true to life, he was studying on his own, at home, on sick days, and he was learning about nature, and eventually became a PhD in the science field. So next, let's flip way ahead, or a little bit ahead, to teachers that made a difference in Gloucester. I think you could name immediately 2 giants in your life who were, I guess, both in the scientific fields, who taught you in high school, in Gloucester High School. Could you tell us about those people?
Sure. When I went to Gloucester High School, I entered the college course, and I tried to get into the freshman biology course, and you had to be
You needed connections.
You had to be a notch above the average there, and I didn't get in. Okay, which I think they made a mistake, but well, c'est la vie. And so I had to take biology in my sophomore year, and I got to have biology with Mr. Francis Beck. And
a turning point.
That was a good move. I'm glad I didn't have. I won't mention his name, who was running the first session. That was a good move, good happening for me. He was himself just, I think, within a couple of years of starting teaching, because he had been in the service, he had been a carpenter, he decided he wanted to be a teacher, so he went to school to become a teacher while he was working. And for a few years he had been teaching, and then I got into his class.
And he was a great teacher and a talented teacher.
He was a good teacher.
Yes.
And
Mr. Speck.
Mr. Speck. And I remember
lasted at the high school for until he retired.
He retired from the high school and from O'Malley.
Right.
Yeah. So I was a good student in biology. And after about 2 weeks, he came to me and he said,
one-on-one.
Yeah, 1-to-1. He said, "Bob, I can't teach you anything. So you're going to have an open year. You do whatever you want, and all you have to do in the end is write a report for me." Oh, fine. That was good.
You're like independent study. We had that in college, but you had it in high school.
I had it in high
Somebody
school.
recognized you.
Yeah.
Independent scholar, studying on your own, anything you wanted, insight, and access to, I think it was like a laboratory in the back of the...
There was some instruments and a few
microscope
things
and so.
in the back. And so, that's a two-sided coin for a sophomore in high school. Well, geez, I don't have to do anything for the rest of the year. And
It
yet,
could have gone wrong. It could have ended badly.
Yeah, but it did. I learned from it in a variety of ways. One was that I scheduled my time and I did little projects.
You learned about scheduling your time.
Yes, I
organizing
learned,
yourself.
Organizing myself, scheduling time. And, I did some projects like dissections and assembly of a skeleton of a frog. And, other things were outdoors where I went to parts of the seashore and I asked questions about, what are all these periwinkles doing in this intertidal zone? And I wondered, well, do they move around? So I got some white paint, and at low tide I went over there and I dipped a little white paint on the back of several hundred periwinkles.
No kidding. I did not
all
know
over
about
this
this
rock.
experiment.
And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to find out how far
If they migrate
out. How far do they go in 1 day, 2 days, whatever.
What was the answer?
1 day later, they were all gone. I couldn't find one of them anywhere. So
they didn't want to be painted again.
they bugged out of there. But apparently they're slow moving, but they're moving all the time. And they spread out, and in 24 hours a periwinkle can travel a long way.
What an experiment. I love that. And you did this at what, age 15 or something?
I guess I was.
Yeah.
So
did you keep a notebook or what? How did you?
Yeah, I kept a little notebook.
All right. Did you at the end of the?
And I wrote a little report.
You did write a report for Mr.
him,
Speck.
and such as it was. And the biggest thing that I learned was responsibility. I already knew a lot of biology. I read a couple biology books, and I read the textbook, and I knew that stuff.
And you had read that encyclopedia part.
Yeah, I already
cover to cover.
Yeah. So what I learned from Mr. Speck was an appreciation for self-discipline and doing what was necessary, doing your homework.
Yeah.
And it spread out into all the other studies that I had.
Right.
And it was a very valuable thing. And I stayed in touch with Francis, and I only called him Francis in his later years. After I was catching up with him in age,
You would telephone. Where did he live? In Kansas or something?
He lived out in Kansas, and he used to spend his summers down in Arizona. And once in a while, his son lived in the LA area, so he came out there once in a while, and I saw him there once. But we stayed together in contact, and he was a fascinating guy, and he had an impact that was above and beyond what would have been expected in a biology class or from a biology class.
And part of it is, if I understand, I'm going to quote something now. Educate all real education is self-education. Would you agree with that?
Most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he basically encouraged and supported you in your quest, your self-education. Another teacher, Gloucester High School, who made an impact on you and you kept in touch with. Tell us.
Yeah, that was Stan Gleason.
And what did he teach?
He taught chemistry. Now I got to say that these biology and chemistry, for me, they were very strong subjects for me. So, I was in those classes. I was one of the better students, and
you came in day one essentially in advanced placement. You already knew a lot.
I knew a fair amount.
Yeah.
I knew more in Mr. Speck's class than I did in Stan's class, but
you knew some.
But
yeah.
And Stan, I had Stan in the junior year in high school, and there was that was a situation because we had a chemistry teacher to start the fall semester off. I won't mention his name, but he got sick.
Right.
And so
I think he was sick. I remember the class. I think he was sick of us, but go ahead.
Yeah, he was having trouble with the kids. But anyways, he got sick and he couldn't deal with it. And so there was a couple days there when we didn't have any chemistry teachers. And we had substitute teachers, and from what I've learned over the years from the insiders who knew, they were looking for a chemistry teacher. And one of our classmates, Connie Gleason, she lives out in Colorado now. She heard they were looking for a chemistry teacher,
which is hard to find a teacher in the middle of the year.
Yeah. So, anyway, she went down to the guidance department of the principal's office and told them that her brother had just graduated from UNH with a chemistry degree. And one thing led to another. And Stan ended up teaching initially as an interim thing that chemistry course, taking over the whole chemistry section of high school.
Right.
And
fast forward, he again the same way. He went through a spectacular career.
He stayed there until he retired.
Until he retired.
Yeah. And he
as an excellent teacher.
Yeah, he was excellent. He was really had a lot of energy.
What did you specifically get from Mr. Gleason?
Mr. Gleason ran a very tight ship in chemistry.
Came to class prepared.
Gave his lectures. Mm-hmm. You had to take notes, and he gave you some prepared notes.
He quizzed you on the spot.
Yeah, we had quizzes all the time, and it was, and I was, an A student. Okay, so it was, but he didn't give me free rein or anything. I just stayed in the class and kept up, So, but he helped a lot of people, and for me, when I went away to UMass, and I had, I had to take chemistry. Freshman chemistry, there were 1,000 kids in that class. Because almost every freshman at UMass had to take chemistry. They had to take botany. You remember, you were there.
I was, but I didn't remember. You just said it was a huge class, and you had mandatory for you to take it.
Well, every engineer and everyone who was any kind of a science major had to take introductory chemistry. I think there were 1,200 kids.
Okay.
In the class.
Yes.
And so, but to make a long story short, I mean, he had prepared his students so well that I was amazed. I mean, I was seeing most things for the second time. in that course.
Yes.
He taught a college-level chemistry course
Right.
at Gloucester High School.
Right, right.
And I ended up being like one of the top 5 kids in the class for the 2 semesters. And you know, in fact, I had a reputation. They used to, you know, they would hand out the top 5 or 6 students' desks and say, you got a 97, you know, you got a 99, and then they'd give everybody else's in, you know, in mass.
And everybody was watching to see that you would always be in that.
Everybody was looking at who got a 99 on that test, you know.
Without studying. Anyway,
anyways,
fast forward again.
Sure.
Fast forward just to get into the memoir vein. You do not have to, in a memoir, you do not have to remember this thing. Educated, you have a theme that you can touch base on, almost like a frog jumps lily pad, and they're all about education, chapter by chapter.
Before you move on away from Sam,
Yeah.
I want to say that I did stay in touch with him over the years.
Please do.
Yeah, and right up until the time he passed away.
Yes.
And
If I understand, you were on. You spoke with him.
His son was with him. He was down. Stan was down in Florida. His son came down to be with him, and on his last day, his son phoned me and helped me have a conversation with Stan.
Sure.
And he passed away that day.
I don't know how many of us have that kind of a bond, lifelong bond, with our teachers, with any of our teachers,
Yeah.
or feel that same sense of impact and great gratitude for life as you did with your, luckily, for 2 teachers.
Yeah.
But people out there, if it's part of your life like that, consider maybe moving that into the first chapter, the opening, the one that will tell people about you and your life and your memories in an insightful way, as somebody who was talking about, let's say, education. In your case, I'm going to flip to another book that was on the bestseller. Yeah, this one is impressive. I think the year that I read it, this was back a few years, maybe 10 years. The year that I read it, I gave it to people. I bought copies to give to people, and I just was very impressed with it. The best book I read that year is called Lab Girl. I didn't expect it because I don't usually read about laboratory. If anybody in a lab, you might, but Lab Girl by Hope Jarin. And this book also was on the bestseller list and was prominent, and she was interviewed on TV and everything. Lab Girl, Hope Jarin. Why I'm especially turning to that when I speak with you is you went through much of what she talked about, making sure that her lab project is approved and she stays with a university or college that she started with, making sure that because she's a woman in a largely male-dominated field, that her part of the project monetarily is remunerated in the same way that fairly that with others. And she talked about the way she survived under these circumstances and thrived. In your case, if I say the word postdoc, and some people might not understand postdoc, tell me about being what is a postdoc.
Okay, after someone finishes their graduate studies and receives their PhD.
When you're already a PhD,
you're
entitled
already,
to be called doctor.
You're already, kind of a doctor, whatever.
You're Dr. Bosselman.
This is sort of like an internship and a residency for a medical doctor. They would get their MD and go on to do an internship, and then they graduate in a big hospital to a resident before they might leave and go teach someplace or become part of a practice or whatever. So for a PhD, if they want to, do research and be entrusted to handle millions of dollars in resources, Well, they're not ready. They're still wet behind the ears when they just get their degree. They need to go to a major institution and work under the supervision of another established scientist for between 3 and 5 years.
And during these 3 or 5 years, we're not talking big bucks or
No, well, I mean,
extravagant lifestyle.
No.
Where were you?
Yeah, as a grad student, I made about $3,500 a year. That's back in mid-1970.
$3,500 a year in a used car, in a small apartment.
Shared house or something.
Shared house.
You get your own bedroom and you share a bathroom.
And you
live with
happy as could be.
Yeah, you had everything.
You almost thought maybe you could be a postdoc for the rest of your life.
Well, that was being a grad student. When you get to be a postdoc, I got a salary bump up to just under $10,000
Oh, you did?
a year. Yeah,
Okay.
it was $10,000.
You had almost enough to go to Foxwoods and see whether you could double it.
So I could rent an apartment for myself.
Yes.
And I could have a car.
Yes.
Usually a used car or a little Ford Fiesta or something that wasn't too expensive.
Right. But again, in a memoir, this is telling people that are interested in writing. And how do you form? What do you say? You talk about your reactions, your feelings, your own input, which is like, did it matter? Yes. Did it matter favorably or unfavorably? And if it was favorable, how happy were you, Johnny?
Well, I just got a 300% raise in salary, so that's pretty good.
Where were you? New York or California?
I went. That's an interesting little story in and of itself. There's no telling where you're going to end up when you finish your PhD. You decide what you want to study. And I had a smattering of this and that when I was in grad school, and I decided I wanted to study the genetics of viruses, the molecular biology, the molecular genetics, all the DNA stuff about small viruses.
I don't want to confuse people, but I'm going to tell it. Study, in his way of talking, is research.
Yeah,
cutting edge, developing, figuring out new stuff, discovering, exploring where no man has gone before. That kind of stuff is not just studying a book and then being able to take a test. Right. Your study is cutting edge. But go ahead further.
Yeah, so I went, I wrote off to various people that I thought were reasonable to work with. And I ended up, I wrote one letter to the Salk Institute. This is named after Jonas Salk. It's a very prestigious, world-famous research institute in La Jolla, California. And it's devoted to a variety of pretty circumscribed areas of research. One of them was...
Because he did polio research.
He did
virus.
Yes.
And the Salk vaccine. And his company, or the company after him, was doing the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, he was an academic researcher. He made the reduction to practice the discoveries associated with the Salk polio vaccine, which you and I can remember at our age getting, like going down to the city hall in classroom-sized chunks from all over the
We
city.
were across the street and we got our injection, and then I started to cry. You did. Go ahead.
We were all trying to act tough, Anyways.
You did the letter work to Salk?
Yes. It did in a funny way. I wrote to one man there, Walter Eckhart, and he didn't have any room in his lab. He wrote me a letter and said, I don't have any room for at least 3 or 4 years, but I will pass your letter around and see if anybody else has room. So that was very generous of him.
Not in the Salk Institute, Or
right
in the salt?
in
Okay.
the lab, in the tumorivirus lab,
Okay.
because there were probably about maybe, there might have been 10 faculty members in there.
So what resulted from his circulation of your letter?
Well, somebody got in touch with me and said, I've got room. So
you're working at the Salk Institute.
So I went into Boston to meet this guy who was just going to go there as a new faculty member from MIT.
Okay.
So I met him at Mass General, where he was giving a seminar, and he hired me and said, "Okay, I'm going to fly you out." I got a chance to fly out to La Jolla and see the institute, and I decided to take that job.
I think he's described this for me before. Fabulous facility.
Oh, God.
Tell us about it. I don't mean it's Disneyland Cinderella's castle, but in its own way.
It's like a Greek temple.
Yeah.
On a bluff above the Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
And there's nothing around it. Nothing. Just rough territory back in the, this is 50 years ago now. But, and a great, central gathering area between the two wings of the building, with a little stream running through it, and a view that was like unbelievable, looking out to the Pacific. It was a great place.
Cafeteria didn't serve school lunch, right? What was the cafeteria?
A little place that was no bigger than this room, and everybody went down and bought a sandwich and stuff. It wasn't fancy.
It was not.
But what was fancy was the people in there. There were several Nobel Prize winners at the institute. Jonas was still working. He was down there for lunch. So if you went down there,
you could speak with Dr. Salk at lunch.
Well, yeah, if I wanted. I had dinner with him a few times, amongst other people and stuff. There's
a guy who sits down at dinner with Dr. Salk and Nobel Prize winners, and he has not written his memoir. Isn't that a crime? Isn't that a sin? But go ahead. You could start with Dr. Salk. But anyway.
Yeah. So it was very interesting, the type of people, and here I was, a kid from Gloucester.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So I spent 5 years there, and it was a great time.
So you were 5 years there before they fired you. No, you were 5 years there, and then somebody recruited you.
Yeah, well, I had to find
put the handcuffs on and wanted you.
I had to find a job.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a job for a couple of years, and eventually, at the end of my 5th year, I got a couple job offers. And one was to be a professor at a medical school in Louisiana. And I went out there a couple times, and I gave a seminar, and they brought me back a few times, showed me around and stuff. And the other one was at the institute, at the Salk Institute, with the guy from, no, I'm sorry, I'm backtracking. And the second job offer I got was at a startup at its very beginnings, biotechnology company.
Otherwise known as?
Amgen.
Which is now famous with
now
lots of people.
One of the biggest biotech companies in the world.
Now, I don't want to say you were the first.
I was number 23.
You were number 23, hired by Amgen.
Yeah.
And which now has thousands of people.
I don't know what it is. Maybe 10 or 15,000 people.
Yes.
I don't know what it is, but
and you were number 23.
Yeah. And
talk about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So they said, well, you want to teach in medical school? Don't do that. You could make a fortune with
yeah. So
molecular.
I had to think about that a little bit because the biotech industry was brand new, and I didn't ever think that I was going to be doing that. I thought I was going to be a college professor.
Yes, yes.
But in the end, I decided, for a variety of reasons, that I would go. I got advice from a lot of people. I would go to Amgen
you got advice from a lot of smart people who said,
That-
go
yeah.
to Amgen.
I had
Yes.
a lot of people telling me, to quote my cousin, who was a big engineer in the aerospace industry and stuff. He said, "Bob, you know what you have to do. Take that job." So, anyways,
I love it.
yeah.
Yes.
So I ended up there. The fellow who interviewed me was George Rathman, who was one of the founders, president and CEO, chairman of the board. I spent the day with him. He sent me a letter. Here, here's some stock. Here's some salary. When can you come?
Years later, you found out, I guess he admitted to you casually, that he was under orders to recruit you. He was not supposed to come back without you.
That was another guy.
Oh, another guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had
Because
two people hunting you.
Yeah. I went back up there. I didn't accept his offer right away. I went back up for another visit.
Right.
And he set me up with a few people to go out to dinner. And he told that to one of the guys. He said, "Don't come back here.
If you don't have him."
If you don't have him, don't come back."
In a memoir, you would do this justice, because it isn't something you just spontaneously bring up in conversation.
Of course, he was kidding, but he was making his point.
It was pointed at you, that they wanted you, like Uncle Sam wants you. And if you wrote a memoir, you'd have to say, this is probably the hardest chapter to write, trying to break down in a way that was understood by people who are not chemists or biochemists or anything. And you have to describe your daily activity, which includes brain work without touching anything, planning, organizing, and you enjoyed it. I want you to put your reactions in there. But if you wrote that, probably probably more than two. If you wrote that, just visualize, almost close your eyes. What are you going to tell people about your days of work, what you did at Amgen? How are you going to, you're looking through microscope for hours at a time.
Well,
you're
yeah.
writing flowcharts. You're working with computers, statistics. What are you doing?
Well, in the position that I had,
Yes.
I had to do some bench work. And during the course of my graduate work and my postdoctoral work at the Salk Institute and so forth, I had shown myself to be just very capable at doing some sophisticated type bench work that wasn't easy to do, and but
You have to do it carefully.
Well, it has to be done carefully. And you have to use some very sophisticated instrumentation.
It isn't like me making spaghetti.
No, not well. It can, you can think of it that way, but anyways, but I managed to do some very sophisticated things. So people were impressed with the work that I did, so
if it's related to what you're going to say, and I wonder if it is, Lab Girl, bestseller, talked about two kinds of lab work. One was with the bench and the microscope and all this stuff with that, and the other was she was part of a team who was interacting and developing this team. So there were two things that she was trying to do at once, had to do at once. One was related to science and physical stuff, and the other was with people. Was your job similar?
Yeah, because
You had to juggle
I had my own laboratory, a small group of people, and I had to interact with a lot of other people. And you have to be productive in a variety of ways. And the way you can be most productive is to be productive with people and to help them do what they need to do and do the right thing and so forth. And so, anyways, my days were initially filled with laboratory work and overseeing a small group of people. And as time went on, I became much more involved in the intellectual side of things, making sure that, not just that things were being done right in the lab, but we were actually working on the right thing in order to accomplish what we wanted. Okay, and so I functioned that way, and I became I was a research scientist, and I became a laboratory head. Then I became a director. Then I became a senior director of research, and that took me 20 years, which is when I retired. So a lot of my later work was just helping other scientists focus on, that let's say they want to find a particular hormone because it might be useful in the clinic to help people. There's a lot of hormones that we're regulating. I mean, a lot of them have been discovered now, but erythropoietin is one of them that regulates red blood cell production in the body. There are several others that regulate platelet development, that regulate white blood cell production. So all of these things are very valuable to help people in various medical situations. And people were looking for these things. And when you're doing basic research, you might decide to do something over here and it doesn't lead anywhere. So, in my case, in several instances, I was able to direct people to a specific area, specific cell line, a specific experiment, a specific paper in the literature or something. It's that this is,
it had a big payoff.
This has a big payoff.
Yes.
Do this, work on this.
Yes.
And
there's a combination probably of intuition as well as just experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
And if I could,
yeah,
I'm explaining to people when they write their memoirs, you're looking for stories that have beginnings, middles, and ends, and you're talking about something that could be rightly fashioned, look back on, and draw a line. Something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, where you made a difference in a medically useful, in other words, life-saving kind of. Wouldn't have happened without your intervention. If I'm right, can you think back and say, yeah, that could make a chapter with a specific name of a specific thing? And I don't know if it was the red blood cell.
No, I wasn't involved in that project.
But one that you did shepherd home to a successful result, or not?
Yeah, there were different projects that I worked on.
There were.
Some of them were very basic, looking at the utility of small viruses to act as sort of like carrier viruses, where you could insert a gene into them and then use the virus apparatus to infect the cell as a vehicle and put the gene into a cell or an organism or in a whole animal and get it to work. Yeah. So I worked in that area for quite a while and published a lot of interesting papers and so forth. We worked with a lot of people in the company. One I worked on with my boss at the time. Actually, he recruited me into his group to try to do this, and I told him, yeah, I'll come in, but I'm doing it. Well, I want to be the leader of the project, and I will do it. But
you said it almost casually, and it's so important. Sometimes people out there will minimize or trivialize modesty, or something intervenes, and you don't tell it as the story really is or can be legitimately. Something is offered to you, and you don't outright reject it, but you make conditions. And it could have been, could have gone away. You wouldn't have the opportunity.
Yeah.
But your boss knew you, and you trusted that I want it as my project. That was good, not bad. You would see it through, and you were invested in it enthusiastically.
Yeah.
But tell it as a story. And just again, the people that are writing memoirs, think back on the start of that episode or event or project or experiment that paid off, that worked well. And who was there and what happened. It might be a dialogue which you did quote from what he said and what you said, and you can simplify it. You don't need to tell everything and say, we also asked what was good for lunch that day. No, you get it. You know how to edit and work that through. I'm just thinking, fabulous ideas. If you had the chance to read a book about behind the scenes in an modern American genetic laboratory, biochemistry, worldwide known, and this is the guy. He could write that memoir and tell you about it, just as this lab girl told about the inside of academic research. All right. We don't have too much more time, but I'd just like to say, wonder, when you write a biography, sometimes a person has a fabulous career and becomes the president of the United States or whatever. But at some point when that stopped, I think there was a title of one of those books, something like When the Trumpets Cease, or something like that, Theodore Roosevelt. When all of that stopped and he was on his own and retired, empty-handed, what do you do with your life? That you have to write up and show how you kind of rescued yourself from a situation which might have been just flat and empty, and you made it into something. I'll give you an example. Riding along, you're ready to stop and take a look at some part of the woods of Gloucester that still exists, and you want to pause and pay attention to it in springtime and see what's blooming or blossoming and what it is. You're ready to take a picture of the trees at a particular time. Tell us about you in retirement. Would that make a chapter? What, in your memoir, would that make a chapter? Go ahead.
Sure, but before I do that, I want to express something that, as I was maturing in my own career.
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds, yeah. So you you have to grow up, and you have to let other people do what needs to be done, and just make sure that they get the idea to do it, and then step away from it. So that
I think every parent in Gloucester knows that.
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
Because other people did that for me.
Yes.
So and when I decided to retire,
we have to retire. Last few seconds. Thank you very much. Next session, we'll join you again on books in Gloucester, writing books, reading books, etc. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Bob.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neitosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien työ.